What if I told you that every conversation you've ever had, every love letter ever written, every speech you ever gave, all of it traces back to a single moment? A moment when one human looked at another, opened their mouth, and made a sound that actually meant something. No one planned it. No one taught them. It just happened. But how? How do you go from grunts and silence to Shakespeare, to philosophy, to 7,000 languages spoken across the entire planet? Scientists have been trying to crack this mystery for centuries, and what they've found is stranger and more fascinating than anything you could imagine. So let's go back. Further back than history, further back than civilization, to the very moment the human voice first became something more than noise. About 7 million years ago, our ancestors first split from the lineage that would eventually become chimpanzees. Now, chimps are smart. They can use tools, they can solve puzzles, and they can even be taught to use sign language. But they can't talk. Not because they aren't clever enough, but because their throats, their tongues, and their brains are simply not built for it. So what changed in us? The first big shift happened around 2 million years ago, when a species called Homo habilis, which literally means handyman, started making stone tools. Now here's the fascinating part. Making a tool requires planning. It requires thinking about steps in a sequence. And that kind of thinking, sequential, structured, is very closely linked to the kind of thinking we use when we construct a sentence. Scientists believe that as our ancestors' brains evolved to handle toolmaking, they were quietly, accidentally, also building the foundations for language. But the brain alone wasn't enough. The body had to change too. Deep inside your throat, there's a small bone called the hyoid. It's the only bone in your body that doesn't connect to any other bone, and it acts as an anchor for the muscles of your tongue and throat. In most animals, the hyoid sits high up near the skull, which limits the range of sounds they can make. But in humans, scientists believe the position of the hyoid shifted over hundreds of thousands of years, and along with changes in the shape of the throat and tongue, this gradually allowed us to produce a stunning variety of sounds. Vowels, consonants, whispers, shouts, singing, all made possible by slow, incremental changes deep inside the human vocal tract. And here's where it gets even more interesting. We actually found a Neanderthal hyoid bone whose shape is remarkably similar to a modern human's. And when scientists studied not just its shape, but its internal structure and mechanical behavior using 3D imaging, they found it functioned in a strikingly similar way to ours. Now, this doesn't prove Neanderthals had full language. That debate is still very much alive. But it does strongly suggest that the capacity for speech goes back much further than we once thought. Now, about 300,000 years ago, something else was happening. Early Homo sapiens were living in groups. Not small family units, but larger social bands of sometimes 100 people or more. And here's the problem with large groups. They're complicated. You have to know who to trust, who's in charge, who did what, and what the plan is for tomorrow. Chimps manage social groups through grooming. They pick lice off each other to build bonds. But you can only groom one animal at a time. Language, some researchers argue, was essentially social grooming at scale. Instead of physically touching someone to build trust, you could talk to them. You could share information with 10 people at once. You could gossip, plan, negotiate, and warn, all without touching a single person. So what did the very first words sound like? This is where it gets beautifully speculative. Some linguists think the earliest proto-language wasn't really words at all, but more like emotional sounds. Something like the calls we hear in great apes today, but slowly becoming more intentional and more varied. Others think it started with gesture, that before we spoke with our mouths, we communicated with our hands. There's real evidence for this. The part of the brain that controls hand movements overlaps significantly with the part that processes language. Maybe early humans pointed, mimed, and gestured, and over time, their vocal cords simply began to mirror what their hands were doing. One compelling theory is called the musalanguage hypothesis, which suggests that before structured language, early humans used something more like music. Melodic, emotional, rhythmic sounds that conveyed mood and meaning without grammar. Think of how a mother talks to a baby today. Sing-song, rising and falling, full of emotion. That might be a faint echo of how our ancestors first communicated. And then, gradually over tens of thousands of years, something clicked. Sounds started becoming symbols. A particular grunt started meaning a specific thing. Not just danger, but that specific kind of danger, the one with 4 legs and big teeth. Nouns were born. Then ways of combining sounds developed. Action words, describing words. And slowly, the scaffolding of grammar began to rise. Around 100,000 years ago, there's evidence of a behavioral explosion in the human fossil record. Suddenly, we see art. We see jewelry, ritual burials, ochre used for painting. These are all signs of abstract thinking. The ability to imagine things that don't exist yet, to give meaning to symbols, to think about death. And you can't really have abstract thought without language. The two feed each other. Language makes abstract thought possible, and abstract thought pushes language to grow richer and more complex. By 50,000 years ago, when modern humans began spreading out of Africa and across the world, they almost certainly carried with them a fully formed, complex language. Not English, not any language we'd recognize, but something with structure, with grammar, with the ability to tell stories, make plans, and pass knowledge across generations. That last part is perhaps the most powerful thing language ever did. It allowed humans to accumulate knowledge. An animal learns only from its own experience. But a human can learn from someone who died 1,000 years ago because they left their knowledge in words. Language turned us into time travelers. Today, there are roughly 7,000 languages spoken on Earth. Each one is a different way of carving up reality, a different lens through which a community sees the world. Some languages have dozens of words for snow. Others have no word for left or right, instead orienting everything by compass directions. Some count only 1, 2, and many. Every language is a window into what a group of humans decided mattered most. And all of them, every single one, traces back to those early moments when a human being first looked at another human being, opened their mouth, and made a sound that meant something. We don't know exactly when it happened. We don't know exactly what was said. But in that moment, everything changed. Because that was the beginning of us. Not just as a species, but as a civilization. Language didn't just let us talk. It let us dream together. And that changed the entire world. And if you want to be the person in the room who actually knows this stuff, hit subscribe.